Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name's Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. This is a brand new episode of She Said, She Said. And I love that Sandy's name is Sandy Settle because it is She Said, She Said with Sandy Settle, which is just like 6 S's in a row.
I love alliteration.
I do too, Sandy. And it made me so happy to become friends with you, which is fairly recent because I was like, oh my gosh, like your name is just perfect for this series. Yeah.
It's my married name. And oh my gosh, I was so excited because I was like,
Sandy Settle.
So beautiful. Yeah.
It's kind of like sing-songy. I almost thought you made it up, to be quite honest with you. Like just for Letterboxd. Like I was like, there's no way this girl's name is Sandy Settle. It sounds like a Marvel character like superhero. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's my superhero name. No, I'm a writer, so I was very happy because I was like, I have an alliterative name now. Like that's
totally.
so fantastic. Yeah, I'm thrilled. I mean, I also really love my husband, but like I was like, nice. Yeah, I'll take that name. That's great. So.
Sandy Settle.
No, my real
Sandy
name.
Settle. Yeah, that's good. I really like that. And then I had the idea when I reached out to you that maybe we were going to do something like you suggested, like Lisa Frankenstein or something that was a little bit more, I don't know. What would you describe Lisa Frankenstein as? Like not nerdy, but
I described it to you as weird girl cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would emphasize the girl in that, right? I think that film is for teen girls. It's a PG-13 movie, and right. I think they really tried to make that one a PG-13 movie, but yeah, weird girl cinema. Like Heathers,
like Heathers. That's a good example.
For teens, yeah.
Yeah. And I felt like we were going to veer into horror. I don't know why. Maybe it was just something about you to me communicated or like made me think that you would probably vibe with that sort of level of like, if we're going to do something feminist or something female, I felt like it was going to be more that than, even though you're actually doing rom-coms right now and they're all like very basic. Like,
yeah. I just chose the most basic list I could find, which was Vanity Fair, right?
Uh-huh.
And a lot of those films, actually, I love and I've seen many times. Like, not to spoil it, but the number one is When Harry Met Sally, which is actually one of my favorite films. And I think that was one of the things that prompted me to use that list because I was like, "That's the right answer." But
yeah.
No, I love everything, and not just in films, in books and everything too, but yeah, I definitely gravitate to horror. I definitely in my own work am very drawn to horror, and I always seem to have horror elements in my work, even if I'm trying not to do that, because that's just, I don't know, that's who I am, I guess, at heart. So definitely
that's awesome.
Right on the money with that.
Isn't that weird though? Because I didn't even know you. Like literally, it was just like it was a total intuition thing because it wasn't based on anything in your profile. Really, it was just like I just feel like
just a weird girl.
No, but
I love it. I dig it.
It's cool. Let's say
I'm glad I'm giving
cool
out that
girl.
vibe.
Yeah.
I've been doing my best, so I'm glad.
I'm glad too, and I haven't really done something that was sort of like, in this vein of like, I also thought of like Jennifer's Body to pair with the one that you picked, or like The Lure was another one that I thought.
I like that movie. That's a weird movie.
It's a weird movie.
That'd be a great one. I mean, we could do that one later. That's a great.
Yeah.
Lisa with The Lure, I think would be a really interesting conversation.
And we got alliteration going for us there too.
Yeah.
Lisa with The Lure. But yeah, so what Sandy ended up, so the way that this is structured, she said, is that my guest always picks the first movie. And then as I'm watching it, I think of things and try to pick something that is either complimentary or would like spark some sort of discussion. So Sandy chose Kiss of the Damned, which is on top of being really, really cool, is very underseen, which I don't really understand since it's by John Cassavetes and Gina Rowland's daughter is the director, who's like very cool. I looked her up. Her name is Alexandra, but she goes by Zan, which is like, come on. I mean,
she's super cool. I want to be her friend. I know. I feel like we would get along.
Yeah.
She
Well,
and I.
how did you see this movie, Sandy? Like, how'd you
Oh
hear of it?
God, I don't even remember. So I was very active on Letterboxd a few years back. Some people might remember this. Brian Formo, who actually
Yeah.
kind of introduced us on Letterboxd, probably remembers that, you know. And then I kind of dropped off of Letterboxd for like 3 years. It's a lot going on in my life around that time, and I just wasn't really online for a while. But I
Mm.
recently came back, and the thing is, like, I logged a lot of films prior to my long break. Now I'm logging a lot more films, but I look back and I'm like, I don't really remember how I found some of these films, you know. But I was just watching so much around that time. I was also like doing a lot of film writing, film crit, and I was watching a lot of stuff. I'm also a huge horror fan, so I think I just was seeking out like every indie horror film I could find that was specifically in my wheelhouse. So like anything with gothic undertones, overtones, anything with vampires, anything that had a romantic kind of horror element to it. That's just stuff I'm into and stuff I'm drawn to, and so I found it somehow. All I know is that I loved it like crazy immediately, and I was like, how come I've never heard of this film? How come nobody told me about this film? You know, but
Yeah, and why has no
ever
one seen
since,
it? And like it's odd to me that like cuz I follow a lot of people who are I mean a lot of dudes are horror fans on Letterboxd. I mean, that's probably I would imagine the biggest population in terms of taste. But there's like
right.
nobody who has logged this. Like it's strange to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's quite it's quite good. I Before we get into it, okay, so this is Kiss of the Damned by Zan Cassavetes. It's from 2012. I don't know if any of you have seen Heroes, but Peter Petrelli is the main dude in this show. So it was really nice to see him because I used to watch Heroes when it came out on a long time ago. But it was cool. But what is it that you like set this up for us as far as like the plot goes, but then also tell me what you love about it.
So, pretty simple plot. There's a vampiress named Juna. She lives in this house, at least temporarily, that belongs to her friend who is also a vampire, Xenia. It's clear that she has probably been alone for a while. It's kind of set up that she's lonesome in the beginning, and perhaps quite old.
Mm-hmm.
She meets a man and they fall in love. And it is almost immediately complicated by the fact that her sister shows up, who's named Mimi, and Mimi is a bad girl and is there to cause trouble. There's also, you know, kind of other subplots about the vampire community that Juna is a part of that are there. The house is, it said briefly that it's in Connecticut, so there are there's a vampire community there, you know, and it's not elaborated on a lot, but there's a little bit of time spent with them. And we kind of spend the film following these two very different kinds of vampire women. In the commentary, Zan says that she sees them as kind of two sides of the same person. One really trying to be a good person, almost a recovering addict in a way. Juna's
Mm-hmm.
like almost, you know, a vegetarian who used to be a carnivore, or somebody who's in recovery who used to be an addict. And Mimi is a full blown vampire and a full blown addict, and she just wants to destroy things. And but yeah, I thought that was interesting that Zan kind of was like, it's almost like they're the same person, but the two dichotomies in that person.
Yeah.
um
Do you see Mimi as just like a straight villain? Cuz I felt like so like Mimi's entrance into their life to me was also kind of exposing Juna's like shame and insecurity and like her rejection of self. Like I almost felt like part of the reason I love this so much is because it was so nuanced in that sense. I didn't feel like Mimi was just totally bad. Um
yeah.
and I also kind of felt like she was more sincere in a way where she was just like there's like a scene where they're talking and she's like, well, you can say whatever you want about me, but I would never turn someone I love. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's this very interesting, like, I don't know, she has more of a moral code almost than Juna does, but she's also, like you said, she's an addict for sure, and she's using everything and everyone. So
Definitely. No, I don't see her as like just totally a baddie, or and that's not, there's no nuance in that. So
Right.
I think the whole time Zan is kind of exploring what this life would be like, right? An endless life. What would you indulge in? How would you see the world? All of those things. I neglected to mention that before, but you just brought it up that Juna almost immediately turns Paolo, played by Milo Ventimiglia, if any Gilmore Girls fans are out there. But
Right. Right.
yeah, and then Mimi kind of criticizes her for this, which you can't argue with Mimi for that. It's clearly like kind of a difficult life, almost a depressing life if you look at it in the long term. And interestingly, Zan brings that up in the commentary as well, specifically in that scene between the two of them where they're kind of looking out the little binoculars at these children who are playing. And you can see Juna's kind of like pining after something she will never have, right? Or something that she misses, her childhood, the fact that maybe she'll never be able to have a child of her own. And she's
Mm.
like kind of really clinging to or preoccupied with the notion of humanity, or trying to come back into contact with her own humanity in some way, as she's no longer drinking human blood. So in that way, I guess you could see it as she's trying to reconnect with her humanity and become some kind of version of a human vampire who's trying to be good, trying to do good. But Mimi is not about that. She doesn't care about, morality or notions of, sorry, being human
Right.
or anything like that. And she's resigned to this lifestyle, right? Almost in she like many addicts I have known, is only interested in you if you want to contribute to that lifestyle with her, and if you don't want to, she's not interested in it. But at the same time, you can see that it's mentioned that she and Juna are sisters, right? We're not sure if that means they're blood relations or if they're just sister vampires, like they have the same person who made them a vampire, like in True Blood.
Good
um,
point. Yeah.
but she brings that up to Juna, in that there's some part of her that still thinks in a moralistic way, to even bring up the morality of changing someone or not changing them. I think at this point, and Zan kind of mentions this in the commentary, she's trying to reconnect with her sister in this moment. Mimi is, and Juna like shuts the
Isn't
door.
having it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the last moment in the film where we get kind of like a human perspective of Mimi. And it's that rejection of her that kind of turns into this spiral that
Well, but
happens
there's
throughout the
also
rest
an
of the film.
interesting conversation that Mimi has when Milo, is it Milo? I'm going to say
Milo?
Milo. When Milo is digging the grave, she has this very interesting conversation with him where she's saying like, you must be really screwed up, like something must be wrong with you if you wanted to turn like this, and you've got problems and you just don't know. And this is why I kind of I was almost rooting for Mimi in the sense that I felt like Juna and him were in a bit of a denial state, because like they're so high and mighty about their love and like true love, and we did it for love, and like you don't understand. Meanwhile, Mimi is like, actually, yes, I do understand, and what you guys did like is even beneath me. You just don't think so because you're just judging me like face value. And then there's a phone conversation later where Zinnia is saying like, you're not giving her any credit. I know where she's at. And that's a total like, you know, you've got an addict in a family where they just cannot forgive the person for the harm that they've caused to the extent that they may not even believe that they could possibly get better. And like maybe
Yeah.
Mimi is actually getting better. I don't know. There's just a lot going on there.
I think there's definitely that moment between her and Juno where she could have potentially begun to get better, right? Or to see things Juno's way and Xenia's way and the other vampires that are trying to not feed on humans. But it's that rejection of her, that she decides she doesn't want to do that after all, and
Yeah.
she kind of just wants to keep living her life this way. Um, Yeah, I mean that scene between her and Paolo is really interesting. And Zahn brings up in the commentary that that's the moment where he begins to hate Mimi as well. Leading up to that, he didn't really have feelings about her. She Zahn felt that, you know, it wasn't interesting for him to hate Mimi just because Juna does, right? That he was more a more nuanced character than that, and that he was kind of like, I don't know her, so I don't have feelings about her, you know. But it's that moment where she starts to kind of prod him, you know, where she's like trying to get a reaction out of him or a rise out of him.
Right.
Zan describes that as the moment that Paolo begins to hate her as well, um, because she is antagonizing him.
But then at the same time, when she seduces him, right? The
Mm-hmm.
most interesting part to me in the entire movie is when she seduces him in the shower, and this is what made me think of the movie To Pair with yours, actually, this scene.
Mm-hmm.
Because she has sex with him, and then when they're done, she says, if there weren't a part of you that didn't want this, it wouldn't have worked. And that to me is like, okay, um, part of the reason that like resistance eventually fails is because you actually do want it, but she's actually like flipping that. She's saying that the reason that you give in is because so much of you is against it, that actually turns into a sort of like lust. Like your resisting is actually the idea is that your resisting is actually making your desire stronger. And I think that that idea is like very profound. And that's why I
Yeah,
thought
I
of the
mean,
whip in the
isn't that
body.
the conundrum that faces all of us in
Yeah.
recovery? Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
that's why
Yeah.
when you're an addict forever, right? Because there's always a part of you that's going to want it.
Yes.
I think.
And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that it's never stated outright. It's implied, perhaps lightly, that potentially Paolo was a bit of a womanizer before he met Juno, you know. And for me, this is my own interpretation because, like I said, there's no, you know, there's nothing in the text that would say this, but my interpretation, it was maybe, you know, if we're dealing with addiction for all of them, there's, you know, maybe he was a sex addict, you know, something like that. A lot of men kind of turn to that as a way to, you know, soothe themselves if they're not leading into substances or they're doing both or whatever. um and to me that was kind of, you know, an answer as to why he eventually gives in to Mimi, because she keeps kind of coming on to him, and it's something that was maybe part of his old life, you know, before he was in love with someone. And just kind of a nuanced other shade of the film's whole dialogue about addiction, about trying to be a good person versus leaning into your vices. You know, looking at
Right.
that in a fan, looking at that in a fantasy lens and looking at that in a realistic lens. Um, I think that's all part of that conversation that Zan is having in that film, because she wrote it as well. So
Well, and I think that too, the thing that saves them, like there's two things that happen, right? There's that Mimi dies, and so that sort of frees her from the codependency thing. And then there's that they tell each other the truth, right? Juna's like, hey, I gave into my baser instincts and killed this guy. And then he's like, yeah, I gave in and slept with her. And that was also very powerful to me.
yeah,
That like that um, because there has to be a tremendous amount of trust to tell the truth, especially when you are seen as somebody who has screwed up so many times in the same way.
yeah,
And the one thing that you're preaching against is the thing that you do, because Juna is literally the whole film judging her so harshly, and she does the
yeah,
exact same thing and in the exact
yeah,
same way. And so that self-righteousness, I feel like it's so powerful to strip that, and for her to admit that, like, yeah, I did this too. I don't know, that humility really speaks to me.
definitely. That final shot of them, they're kind of standing face to face outside before they get in the car to move to Italy, and Zan I wrote this down because to me it really wrapped up the film in a beautiful way. But she described that scene as finally them letting go of illusions and
Mm.
acknowledging their demons and those of the person that they love as well. And then giving them a space for a new happiness based in reality, which I thought was really beautiful, especially for such a fantastic film. You know, you're dealing with vampires, you know, fictional elements and all of that. But I thought that was I mean, just a real grasp of her own concept, right? And being able to wrap her film up in a way that felt satisfying, but also realistic, also true. That they're never going to be able to completely divorce themselves from the reality of their situation, right? But if they're looking at each other realistically, and forgiveness is a really big part of that handle on realism, I always feel that very strongly. Being able to forgive people because people are fuck ups
Yes.
in a
Yes.
loving, kind way, you know. Um,
Yeah. Well,
as
and
humanity,
also
we're pretty fucked up, so we're constantly trying and then failing, and we need to be given a chance to try again.
yes, and I think too that one interesting thing that I thought of for both films too, and a lot of it like Giallo movies are this too, which is that the thing that animates you and the thing that, like, for vampires, that lust, you know, that bloodlust that
Mm-hmm.
she has when she seduces him in the video store, which I love that it was a video store because I was like, I don't know what year we're pretending to be in, but that was great that there were like VHS tapes.
Yeah.
Um, but her, like, them being drawn together feels so charged and fueled and erotic, and but the the whole argument of this thing, which I think a lot about as I'm in recovery, is part of part of the drive that would lead you to forgiveness and a depth of love is also your drive to self-destruct. Like, those things are so interwoven. And so when you're trying to tame that, right, or remove it entirely, like she just wants the girl out. It reminded me of, like, you know, wanting the substance out or wanting the thing out of your house and being so desperate for that. But at the same time, it's in you though. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also like contributing to your ability to be passionate. And that's just a very tangly thing that I felt like was visually clear in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the film that you chose, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is also very visual, right? Visual storytelling. And I mean I know we're talking about film. Film is a visual medium, but like there are films that are doing something visually that contributes to their story in a fundamental way, and then there are films that are not doing that as strongly. And I think both of these films are very strong in that particular aspect, right? That, and I think it's one of the things that I really love about this movie so much is how Zahn chose to tell this tale in a visual sense, right? There's a really strong feminine edge to this that I feel like I struggle to describe or to quantify in words the way that I feel it, right? Like I feel so strongly about this film. I don't feel like there are a lot of films that look like this one, especially in a contemporary setting, right? I think there are more in the setting that you know, the other film that we're going to talk about takes place in, that kind of use this form of visual storytelling. Um, you know, it's a very strong gothic feel. It's really strong lights, really strong shadows, really saturated colors. I was, you know, noting that when I rewatched this film for the podcast, and noted it as well in the other film. Just how saturated the colors are, how deep the purples are, how shadowy and deep the blues are. You know, there's really strong reds. There's really, really dark blacks. There's really bright, kind of almost creamy whites. Yeah, just an incredibly beautiful film. I think that it signifies a sort of heightened state of being, right? A heightened sense. I think when you're an addict, you spend a lot of time in that heightened state of being, right? You're not sober, right? So you're always kind of seeing the world through a different sort of lens. Like things are always heightened, colors are always brighter. Your reactions to things are always stronger, and I think the Gothic sensibility taps into that aspect of human emotion as well. So I think it was a perfect way to elaborate on her themes. To shoot the film in this way and to be able to harness it so well, even though it is a contemporary setting. I feel like some filmmakers seem to struggle with that. They always want to make it a period piece when they're doing a
Right.
heightened stylistic thing like this. And I think Zahn's film just proves that you don't have to do that. That it can be
It's kind of
contemporary.
like the Jarmish. Like I don't know if you've seen Only
One of
Lovers
my
Left Alive.
absolute favorite filmmakers.
Yeah, and I love that movie, but that's another example where it seems, I think it's like in Morocco, but it
Tangier,
seems
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tangier. Yeah, it seems older even though it's contemporary. He's able to like merge cuz they're like driving around in a car and it looks like, yeah, so I mean there's parts of it where it seems like it's merging the two, and this definitely does. This also has great music too that kind of gets it going. And the way that they dress kind of feels more like
Mm-hmm.
Dracula. And she's so pretty. The other thing about this is just it's hot. I mean, I
Yeah.
was I was
Everyone's so
just like,
hot. I'm a open bisexual, so I'm like, this is a film for me.
this is
Yeah, like,
it's just it's so like also that the women are like they're like deep and raspy and they have
yeah,
accents and
they're like
I don't
both
know.
French.
Yeah,
Everyone's French
French.
except for
Yeah,
Milo.
inexplicably French.
Yeah.
Um and just hot. Yeah, I just appreciate that so much. Part of the reason I love True Blood, I mean, I think is it's pretty trashy, but it's like
Are you kidding?
it's
I noticed that you had brought up True Blood and compared it to this. True Blood is my
yeah.
favorite show of all time. I will say that with no
Okay.
shame whatsoever. I
Good.
watched it probably at least a dozen times all the way through. I wish that was an exaggeration. It's not.
And
That
that's more like you, the SS Sookie Stackhouse. I'm just
yeah.
getting
It's just that
the
show has been there with me through my whole adulthood,
yeah.
I think it's just like you said, it's very trashy, but in that way it's like a warm blanket, It's
It
just
is. It
it's
is. And it's just like I don't know. I saw a movie called Ravenous recently, and where they were
yeah,
cannibals, and I was thinking about how
directed by a
like
woman.
yes, and that movie's wild. But I was thinking about the difference between like with cannibalism and vampires. Vampires always get to be sexy, and they always are.
Mhm,
It's like the siren call allure. So it does make sense that they're like beautiful.
mhm.
Um, but then it's essentially the same thing where there's this using thing and this consumption, and that like you are trying to not exactly inhabit someone else, but just like make them a literal part of you. And I don't know, even that seems sexual. There's just nothing about it that doesn't sort of ring in that vein
Yeah.
and really gets primal, like on a visceral level, like you're saying, where it just makes sense, even though you're not thinking it through.
Yeah, Ravenous, I think, is a very homoerotic film.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
this is just my 2 cents. I think it's because a woman directed it. We just are like preoccupied with homoeroticism, and we're like,
It's fine.
how do we make cannibalism sexy?
You know
No,
what? You know what I
but
think though?
yeah,
I think we just want eroticism. To be honest, like
yeah,
I
yeah,
I don't even know that it even comes down to gender. We're just like, can we please have something that's sensual, like
yeah,
that
definitely.
isn't. I don't know. There's just something about it that you can definitely tell when it's a female director, in my opinion, because the way that the senses
Hmm.
play into it
Yeah,
versus any other
absolutely. You're
factor.
right.
Yeah, it just feels different.
Hmm. Just
Which,
the
speaking of,
gaze, right? It all goes back to
yeah,
that
right,
gaze of
the gaze.
experience.
Yeah. I was going to shift. So the one that I chose in response to this was The Whip in the Body, which is not a female director. If we had gone with the lore, it would have been. But this is Mario Bava, of course, who is exceptional, from the 60s. And like you were saying, one of the things that stands out to this is like this is a gothic period piece that feels like what this movie is doing in a contemporary sense.
Hmm.
So the two, I think, are, they kind of meet. This isn't a vampire story, it's a ghost story, but I think they meet in the way that she is hardcore resisting her urges and just like failing constantly. And
Yeah, to the point of hallucination.
yes.
Spoilers.
Yeah. And well, she's like a murderer. I mean, she kills like
Yeah.
multiple people in the and I don't even know if she knows that it's happening.
Yeah, she's deep in that fantasy life.
Yeah.
Wow, this movie, I really enjoyed revisiting it. It had been years since the last time I watched this movie, and again, everybody is sexy in this.
Yes. Oh my
This is probably
gosh.
one of Christopher Lee's sexiest roles. I don't know if it's because there's like kinky stuff involved. He's also quite young in this. He's also
Yeah.
playing a very archetypal gothic character in this, which is the kind of hateful and yet very sexy man.
Kurt. It's
Kurt,
like
yes, where
Kurt.
you're like, he's so repugnant, but I'm so drawn to him. Very classic, your Heathcliffs, your Mr. Rochesters. I have a character like
Mm-hmm.
this in my first novel, just because
Mm.
this is like the classic gothic man. But he does a great job in this role. But yeah, am I gonna elaborate on this one for a
Oh,
minute?
go
Or
for it. And we're gonna
oh,
spoil the heck out of it. We have to
yeah,
spoil it in order to talk about it. So go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Yes.
So
Tell us what it's
spoilers,
about.
this film is super old, so um so he is the heir to an estate. Is that I
Yes.
wasn't quite
Yes.
clear on that, but
I think he's like an elder brother. This is definitely set up like
right.
a soap opera.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah. This is like Dark Shadows, that kind of
good
vibe.
point. Yeah.
And I mean, I think Bava really excelled at that. Like, I think he's probably the best. He had the best understanding of the Gothic when it comes to any
Mm.
filmmaker I can think of. His film Black Sunday is one of my absolute favorite films. It's in my top 4 on my letterbox, as I'm sure many people have noticed. And I think that's like the Gothic film, but this one is definitely really, really good as well. And this one's in color. That film's in black and white. So he really
Right.
gets a chance with this, I think, to elaborate on that Gothic color palette, that heightened sense of things, likewise to Kiss of the Damned. And that's
Mm.
a major part of this form of storytelling, is to give you something really lush to look at. Really lurid is the word that I kept thinking of. There's that shot where he lit. Okay, so there's a woman, and he and this woman are very drawn to each other, and he is a bad
Navanka, I
man,
think. Yes.
right? But
Naughty.
she is drawn to him. She professes to hate him, and yet when he comes on to her, she seems to have a really hard time saying no to him, right?
Yes.
And she's realized that she is into BDSM. She likes to be whipped by him. He has this riding crop type whip. And there's this scene on the beach where he's coming on to her. She's like saying, no, no. And then he like starts whipping her with this riding crop. And she's like obviously very turned on by this, right? Still
Yes.
kind of trying to resist, but like is clearly into it. And then there's this really beautiful shot and very lurid, like I said, I felt, of them like embracing and necking after he whips her on this rock on the beach side with like these beautiful sunset colors in the background. And I was like, this is like the cover of a Gothic paperback, and so much of the film felt like that to me. Is just like, that could be a Gothic paperback cover, that could be a Gothic paperback cover, and that's the whole vibe I think that Bava is harnessing in this, is that very heightened, like kind of dark romanticism where there's something off about it, right? There's not a wholesomeness to the romance. It's unnatural in some way.
Sinister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if Kiss of the
Yeah.
Damned is kind of the vampirism, is this sinister aspect to the romance, in this film it's like there's this like harmful not trying to kink shame anybody, right? But like
Yeah.
it's a little more ambiguous. Like they're not doing this in a loving way. Like there's like a real darkness to it because, like I said, she professes to hate him. You know, she says she really hates his guts, basically, and yet she can't disconnect herself from this experience to the point where he is murdered. She murders him, right?
Yes.
About that.
Yes, she does. Yeah.
Yeah, which is left ambiguous for most of the film until the very end.
Right.
And yet she continues to hallucinate that he is there, that he is whipping her, that he is stalking her, and seems like this experience, you know, left an indelible impression on her to the point where her connection to reality becomes disconnected, and she starts enacting his behavior or becoming him in some way. That's interesting too. I guess I didn't really think of that whole aspect. If Zan kind of described Mimi and Juna as two parts of the same person, I guess the two of them kind of become the same person as well. I didn't even think of that. But
Yeah, and also Sandy, that like the violence is within, like that it's not just that she's, you know, a sub. She do you know what I'm saying?
yeah, she's not just a bottom.
She doesn't just receive. Yeah. She is a murderer. And
Yeah.
she causes quite a lot of damage. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and she is not there's like a line that Kurt says to her when she's on the rock where it's like, I know who you are, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was I don't know if you saw the movie Challengers that just came out.
Not yet. I know everybody's obsessed with it.
Okay, well, there's a line in there where he's basically like, he's like, I'm a piece of shit, and that's why I can see you for who you are. Basically, like, you like me because I'm terrible, and because I'm terrible, you allow me to see your terribleness. And
Yeah.
that is there's so much I resonate with these two movies, but that to me is so powerful because this guy over here, what's his name? Christian. Come on. He could never have access to who she is because he's
Yeah.
way too innocent and he's way too pure and he's way
Mm-hmm.
too puritanical, blah, blah. And he likes the other girl anyway who he belongs with. But that's another common thing where it's like, you know, why do nice girls like bad boys? Because the nice girl can be seen for the bad parts by the bad
Yeah.
boy. It seems to me to make sense.
Yeah, because we all contain multitudes, you know? And I think
Mm.
a nice girl is a person who doesn't exist, right? That's a fantasy that men of, or people in general, society has concocted, you know, to try to explain certain types of people. But we're all gray, nuanced, you know? And I think that's part of the commentary on being seen as a whole person rather than just one aspect of yourself, right? You may only be showing one aspect to the outside world, but we all have a lot going on inside. So, you know, a bad boy, quote unquote, would see maybe the part of yourself that you don't feel is societally acceptable is something that you can show around the people that you're with, because you are ashamed of those things, because you don't know how to express those parts of yourself. You know, it's
Yeah.
archetypes, right? And I mean, I love archetypes, don't get me wrong, but I mean, that's the beginning of storytelling in many ways, right? Is the archetype of morality, of trying to be good versus being bad, right? Or leaning into the shadow self.
Yeah, I was about to say this is really just shadow side stuff, and this is like
Mhm.
instead of I guess in both movies to varying degrees, you have women who are either coming to terms with that side of themselves and accepting it, like Mimi,
Mhm.
and then kind of like going into it in unhealthy ways. But then you've got somebody who's just like trying to reject it, like Juna. And then you have her who sort of like becomes both, but then in a very like, you know how like in recovery, you're trying to recover yourself, right? You're trying to like access
Yeah.
who you actually are. And the
Yeah.
drugs and the addictions and everything are preventing you from access to self. So in this manner, it's like, if that's the goal, how can those things be accomplished while still maintaining passion? And I
Mhm.
don't know that either one answers that question, because that's what I'm always trying to think of. I'm always
Yeah.
grappling with that.
Mhm. That's the eternal push and pull of being. um, that's what being alive is, right? Is every day you kind of reassess that. Every day you kind of reconfront that. And I think that's as close to being as close to no longer being an addict as we will ever get, right? And for I mean, I think not just substances, right? I was thinking about this a lot when it came to these two films because neither of them, I mean, the blood, I suppose you could consider a substance, right? Like a drug. But it's not
Mm,
really the focal point, right? This is about addiction as a spectrum, right? And I
yes.
think when we think about being an addict or we think about addicts, we think about substances, right? Which in many cases, yes, but not all cases, right? There are other ways to be addicted to something. You can be addicted to, the idea of relationships. You can be addicted to sex. You can be addicted to gambling, whatever. There's all kinds of ways to be too into something to the point where becomes a detriment to you. And I think most people are addicted to something, right? Even if they
Yes.
haven't thought of themselves as an addict, I think there's something inherent in humans that is addictive, right? We're into the high of being alive, and life is hard. Like life is constant pain, physical pain. We lose the people we love in all different kinds of ways. We go through shattering experiences all the time. Um, and being addicted to something kind of takes your mind off of that for a while. So I think more than ever, people are addicted to their smartphones, like there's all kinds of ways to be addicted to something. And I think that both of the films, are really confronting addiction as a spectrum. And I think that that's way more interesting than zeroing in on one thing.
I
Um,
agree. Or just saying like it's cocaine, or it's
yeah.
like there are a lot of good movies about alcoholism and about like where I feel like it sort of maybe simplifies it in a way that's somewhat useful when you're like first starting, like when you're first trying to give something up. It's kind of nice to have things be very black and white,
Yeah.
as much as you can, because you're foggy and it's hard. And there's like I find it interesting where you were talking about that, like, with the substance, things are heightened. For me, it was always about numbing. It's always about like, I feel way too much,
Mm-hmm,
generally
mm-hmm.
speaking. And so this is like when I would drink, I would feel less,
Sure.
like calm, like trying to calm down the thoughts or to just slow down.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I don't, it's like I can feel everything, and it's so much better. It's so much better. But
Yeah.
when you're in that, you actually, I think what you're suggesting, which is that there's this intensity, and actually it's not. It's just like it's really really numbing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's making it so that you can't experience life, that you don't
Definitely.
actually know what's going on, that you have no empathy towards other people because you're only thinking about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
um and so at the end of Kiss of the Damned, it seems like there's some hope because they are preferring reality to
Mm-hmm.
the illusion. Whereas in With the Body, she kills herself thinking that she kills him, but she can't really live without the illusion in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm very I really love the end of Kiss of the Damned because I am very happy that she chose ambiguity, but with a little bit of hope injected into it as well. I actually prefer that in my horror, right? That those two things together, because I think that it just rings a little more true, to experience. Like, sure, some things end in extreme tragedy. Sure, some things end very happy. But I think more often we get ambiguity with a little bit of hope because you're still alive.
Yeah.
Which is
unless
what
unless
kind of,
it's
I
like
mean, the final girl, that's kind of the whole concept of the final girl in horror.
true.
Is she's still alive, so there's still some hope for her. But there's all kinds of other stuff that's been added to her psyche now, and so there's kind of like this dance, the complications that come with continuing to be alive.
Like Scream is what I was just thinking of, like
Sure.
Nev Campbell's character.
Yeah.
Or I thought of Hellraiser because poor Julia is.
Ooh, I love Hellraiser.
I do too, of course.
Yeah. No, I'm a big Clive Barker, one of the best. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Hellraiser. I love Possession. There are certain movies with female characters where I just feel like they are, I don't know, they're embodying such I don't know. Like I hate to overuse the word passion, but there's just like this vitality and like this like stubborn like no, I will be satisfied. That just doesn't happen a lot,
Yeah.
And it's like starting to happen less with like men in movies where it's just like that drive and that insistence upon enjoyment and pleasure is not actualized or is like minimized now. It's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against feel-good cinema. I love them. I am watching romantic comedies right now.
Romantic comedies.
There's a part of me that also wants to feel good. Though I just watched Phantom Thread and I was like, I don't feel good.
I know. I was going to say we should bring that up because we were talking about the toxicity and how that movie is neither romantic nor comedy, arguably. I don't know if I get shot for saying that, but like I don't find it romantic.
I just don't get the argument. It's not coming together for me,
I don't know if they're trying to do like if this is sort of like a in its own way like a BDSM thing where it's like you're trying to like the person wants to be weaker or brought down in some way so that parts of themselves that they're normally
yeah, I mean, wouldn't we say that Phantom Thread is kind of a horror film? Like, that was kind of the vibe I was getting with like the poisoning of the tea with the mushrooms, and then the end where he like purposefully eats the poison mushrooms, and like she's like, "I want you to be brought low," or whatever. It's like this extreme power dynamic, and I'm like, I don't think this is romantic. It's fucked up. Like I was like, kind of scary, like. So yeah, I don't know. I was getting some horror film elements from that film, certainly.
Yeah, and it's also kind of implying that like I don't like you the way that you are.
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of a rejection of the self in a way, in a weird way, where it's like, like don't date someone that you want to change so much.
Yeah, trying to mold them into what your idea of them is rather than just who they are, right? And it's extreme toxicity to that, right?
Right.
I think that I think it's just my 2 cents, don't get on me everybody, but I just think PTA maybe he's in the middle of a dialogue. He's in the middle of a conversation with himself about experiences perhaps that he has had, and that's okay.
Well, this was
that's
literally
okay to be in the middle of the conversation.
It was literally based on that he said, I forget where I read this, but like that he and his wife, where he got really, really sick and they actually like had a really bonding time together because he's such a control freak and he's not, he doesn't, she doesn't ever get to take care of him, I think is the way he phrased it.
Oh, okay.
So he had this idea of like, oh, what if there were a couple where they're so type A and they're so in control and they're so perfectionist that literally they don't need to be taken care of at all, and maybe one person needs to feel caregivery.
That's so,
and
for me it's hard to even put myself in the perspective of not naturally being in the caregiving frame of mind. I think some people think that astrology is a crock. I get that, but I believe in it, and my birth chart, what you would say is very like caring oriented. Like I have my moon's in Pisces. Pisces is like super nurturing, really wanting to be a caregiver to people. So moon deals with your emotional life, and I feel like, so your emotional part of your chart is emotions. That's like what mine, so for somebody like me, I'm watching a movie like Phantom Thread and I'm like, wow, like you're not already doing that stuff for each other? Like, it's hard for me to
Yeah.
even put myself in the mindset where that would be something new. I think that's why I was like struggling with what he was even talking to himself about in that film. But
Good
now when you describe
good
it like
point.
that, I'm like, oh well, that makes sense. Like if you're a type A, and you don't usually see that as part of your set of
Vulnerability.
skills,
Right.
that
Right.
would be
Cuz yeah.
transformative to finally be able to do that with your partner. Um,
But
and
then to do it in a way that is to your detriment is kind of your argument for whipping the body, where you were saying like her being whipped, like, you're not saying necessarily like that you're judging the actual activity. It's more just like
I think it's the
it's such a
psychology.
fine line,
Yeah.
right? Of like, is harming yourself in that sense, can it be equated to like your optimal health self, or is there a way to implement those things where you're not poisoning, or you're not like breaking down your
Yeah.
defenses in that way? I don't know.
I think that Zan's film is a natural progression of the kind of the setup of the whip in the body, if you're thinking about it in that way. Um, that the whip in the body leaves that ambiguous, right? We're not sure if, you know, it's not portraying it as like bad necessarily, but it's not portraying it as good either, right? And it's like it's a little more messed up psychologically, I think, than the eventual point of or the end point, right? Kiss of the Damned leaves us is a little bit, there's a little more hope, and I think that that's the natural progression of that conversation, because whipping the body is more traditional, right, structurally, and it ends in that kind of like high operatic way, where she's just like, it was me all along and now I will die. And that's all we get. And it's cool, like, don't get me wrong, like, it looks great, and it's just like, you're like, oh, what a mood piece. Like, and you're like, oh, you want to watch it on a stormy night, like, it just gives you that kind of like chilly finger
Yeah.
down your spine kind of energy. But Kiss of the Damned is doing that sometimes as well, but it just wants to take that conversation a little bit further, which I think is indicative of just being made at a more contemporary time, and as well as Zahn choosing a contemporary setting, I think does it a service in that way. um
And she's also got her like she's got the Cassavetes close up thing going on, where there's a lot of like,
yeah,
that's what I always associate with JC is like
yeah,
the
yeah,
like
like where
in
they're
your
all sitting
face,
around in the circle, the vampire, she does these like really interesting close-ups.
close. Yeah, and so it
Yeah.
does feel quite personal,
Yeah.
and it does feel like they're oddly, it feels almost political in a way. Like that whole the whole vampire scene is like almost like you're watching like a bunch of politicians talk, or like people who are like trying to like improve the world and have all these like ideals
Yeah.
of what like the best way to conduct yourself is in this society, sort of thing. And that sort of puts a groundedness in something that's like ludicrous, because at the
Yeah.
beginning he's like, vampires aren't real, like what are you talking about, and so there's that like there's a merge there of like where we are like being invited in um to like
Nice one.
that conversation. Thanks. Where it's like, there's some realism there, and so whipping the body is just like a total fantasy,
Yeah.
whereas I think this puts some more rootedness in it.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, Zan said in the commentary that some people had told her that they find that scene boring, which I thought was really interesting. Just like them sitting around
No.
table talking politics, more or less, But I
Right.
love it because it injects that sense of realism, like you were saying. It gives them more color. Like, instead of just like that really strong heightened sense of things, which, don't get me wrong, I love that stuff too. And this film has tons of that as well. But I like her playing with both of those things, giving you a sense of groundedness sometimes, where you have this ludicrous concept of vampirism, so you have to ground that somehow, or else it totally just
Mm-hmm.
becomes a mood piece, which is not bad. It's just not what she was trying to do. So
Yeah, and they're kind of like very PC about everything. It's like a very like oh, don't worry, this blood is not from a human.
yeah.
It was raised in this, like
Yeah.
it's like
kosher.
yeah, it's kosher, right? And it's like there's like a Portlandia sketch that's hilarious where they're like, was this chicken happy like on this farm? And
That's me. That's me.
were they in what manner were they put down? It's just that sort of vibe sort of adds to this like feeling of like, oh, vampires are people too, thing. And I appreciated that. But at the end of the day, I think this is the sort of like conversation to me between like self-acceptance, shame, how much of like what you resist is part of who you are. And like, I books about like the shadow side are so much about like your shadow self cannot be like ignored and shut down. It will come out.
Yep.
So you might as well treat it like a passenger in your car where it's not driving, but you talk to it and you let it in and you don't just like kick it out, because it just can't
be
those
kicked out,
elements,
right?
it can't be discarded. And there's just no reason to, on top of trying to get rid of them, to also judge them is such a disservice to your fullness of self and your like even capacity to be authentic. I think negating that stuff is so childish in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the beginning of the film, for Kiss of the Damned, it starts out very passionate in that way, right? They have this kind of encounter where they're immediately drawn to each other. They have like a very kind of hot and heavy beginning where they're just like,
man,
he like lets himself be turned like immediately, right? Because that's how strong that, but at that point you can't really call it love, right? They don't know each other yet. It's like lust and like extreme interest, right?
Extreme,
but not love necessarily, because love kind of needs to have a backbone behind it to hold it up. And I think by the end they finally reached that state, right? They're beginning this new life together. They're moving to a new continent and they're going to start a new life together, and they're going to be able to potentially do that now, right? Because they have more understanding. They've both had to forgive each other for something very serious. And I think that's, that's shadow work to be new agey about it, or whatever. I don't know is that the layman's term for that these days? I only know kind of from my own practice and my own experience what I would call that. But in your experience, for instance, is that usually just called shadow work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's the, and you can't even, I would argue now that I've learned so much and been in therapy that you can't really do that when you're, in your addiction.
Yeah.
Like that work is not compatible with denial and indulgence and, just living in a alternate reality, and really preventing any sort of legitimate suffering. So like you as a person is just stunted. Like, how they say like whenever you start something and then you quit it, as far as like alcohol goes, your emotional maturity is the level that you started drinking, right? So everything becomes like this arrested development. And it's curious in that sense with the vampires, where it's like they are definitely arrested development. They are stuck in time. They never get older. They never age. And so I don't know. There's so many parallels to me that it just resonates on so many levels, intellectually and just like instinctively.
Yeah, definitely. That makes me think of Only Lovers Left Alive again, right? That Jarmusch movie. That kind of stasis, right? Stasis, being stuck in time. Like there's got to be. I love that meditation, right? And that if Only Lovers is if nothing if not a meditation to me, right, on just that entire concept, right? And Kiss of the Damned to some extent as well, but I feel like that film in particular, Jarmusch's film, is really just thinking about long time, and how it would be nice and how it wouldn't be so nice to be kind of stuck in the same place for so long. I mean, you think about like the strange dissonance of looking the same forever and yet having experiences compound upon you over ages, and
Hmm.
how odd that would be, because you would look in the mirror and you would be like, I look the same, but I've literally been alive for 200 years or something. And how would you be able to reconcile that within yourself, in the because in the spectrum of experience, we're taught that, as you become wiser, you also physically age, and those things are inextricably linked together.
And I would think that it would become exhausting to be hot forever.
For
Like,
real.
as
I'm very much
as
looking
nice as
forward to my crone years. I'm like getting some gray hairs now, and I'm like, yes.
yes. Well, I mean, I just think that it's like you're saying, it's just that it would get, I mean, after a while, you're like, okay, I've had enough. Like,
Yeah.
there's only so much pleasure and so much like seduction and so much gratification where you're like, what else is there? And I think that that is hopefully the moment that we all sort of arrive at
Mm-hmm.
eventually, is that like, this is pretty empty and I don't know who I am. And like, I don't know what kind of pain I'm in even.
Maybe
And
that's so interesting.
yeah.
I love the way that you said that, because to me that ties into the whip on the body at the end here. That maybe there wasn't anywhere else for her to go, right? Within that kind
Hmm.
of specific, almost trauma bond addiction that she felt like she had with this person, that wasn't, there was nothing holding it up, right? There was no real love in it or anything. And so there was nowhere, you back yourself into a corner with that kind of dynamic, right? There's nothing you can do with it. You can't grow within that space. You can't,
Right.
um, so for her to die in the end seemed the only natural way for things to go.
Yeah. It's either die or get
Yeah.
better.
And the same with
Like,
Mimi, right? That there's,
yes.
because we didn't even talk about that part of the film where she brings the young fan played by Riley Keough. I noticed,
Yeah.
probably one of her first roles, honestly. But
Yeah. And pretending to be a virgin. I
yeah,
was like, Riley, nobody's buying this, but I
yeah,
appreciate
yeah,
the,
yeah. I'm
the,
like,
the
sure,
implication.
sure.
Sure. You were a virgin once.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
all were once. But yeah, but that's kind of like the final nail in Mimi's coffin. Where she
Yeah.
just does this horrible thing, like just for
Yeah.
kicks, just because she
Yep.
gets pleasure out of other people's misery at this point, because she's miserable herself. And like many miserable people I have known, they really want other people to join them in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And they want to, it's a power thing too. It's
yeah.
also just like, I'm jealous of you in some way or envious of you in some way,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't be you, so I'm going to bring you down.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
that's, yeah. But it's also, I felt like that was powerful too, because it exposed her hypocrisy. Like, all these people walking around judging other people and acting like and then it's like, you're just not, when you're in a circumstance where you could have like your peak temptation, in this sense, it was the virgin, the shutters were closed, everything was perfect. If she had resisted in that context,
Mm-hmm.
that's like earned dignity to me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have proven to yourself that you can make a choice, but she relents. And
Mm-hmm.
so then there's that despair and that like
Yeah.
shame, and yeah, there's a lot going on in this movie.
Yeah, I do love that scene though. There's just something really,
Heartbreaking.
it's so beautiful. It's so devastating, but I think it spoke to me as a recovering addict, Um just because it made me aware in that moment, as I often am reminded, that you're always in recovery, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's going to always, inevitably, I think all of us who are in recovery, we dread the moment where we are in a situation where we're so tempted. You're always trying to, I mean, hence why, you can't hang out with your old addict friends once you're in recovery, right? For this exact reason. Because, and to me, in that scene, like, Xenia was, the recovering addict, and yet she let Mimi come over, and Mimi is an addict, right? And that's why you can't hang out with Mimi. And yet Xenia, that was kind of her mistake, right? Was to be like,
Right.
was to underestimate Mimi in that way, right? Which I think
And maybe overestimate her own ability to
exactly.
uh say no.
Hmm.
I mean,
I think that
there's
was
a
set up
reason.
earlier in
Yeah.
the film, actually, as well, because it's made clear that Xenia is kind of a narcissist, right? She
Exactly.
really loves
Exactly.
attention, and I think that was,
Yeah.
even more so than her like aspect of addiction with being a vampire. But it's her fatal flaws are narcissism, right? Like she can't say no to an adoring fan, and that was what was so alluring to her. She failed to, really gauge her own recovery, whatever you would call that.
Right. And then that's when all the, you know, this is a whole other discussion, which we're not going to get into because it would just be, but
Yeah.
the whole thing about when you stop whatever it is that you're primarily using, that all these other character defects come into play and all these other temptations come into play. And then all of a sudden you notice all these things about yourself
Hmm.
that sort of are geared in that same direction of like, what can I get?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what can I get out of this person? And so all those nasty things just come up, and that's not even shadow side stuff. That's like, I don't know what I mean. They call them character defects in the steps, but it's also just like the parts of yourself that you haven't really learned how to redeem,
Mm.
maybe.
Yeah. That's just, to me, it's always that kind of concept of yin and yang, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we can exercise those parts of ourselves. I don't think that's possible. I think we can
No.
look at them and
Right.
ponder them and
Yes.
do that
And I think they
every
can be
day.
transformed to a certain extent. Like, I think that they're like raw material where they want to be used, and you've got them. And I don't think inherently they're bad.
Hmm.
It's just that they are misguided, and
Hmm.
maybe bringing them into the right path could make you more whole.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we're talking about the yin and the yang, I think it's what do you feel like you fundamentally need, right? As a person, what do
Mm,
you need? And it boils down to the same things for all of us. We might seek them in different ways, right? But to be loved, to be safe, to be warm at night, to have a purpose, and I think when we can't get those things in a way that feels wholesome, we begin to seek them in other ways that are often detrimental to our well-being, um, because what they give us an immediate relief, they give us a high, it gives us a false sense of purpose sometimes, for a moment, because I think when people aren't being given the things that they need, they are going to inevitably keep looking for them, but it may come in a way that is a fantasy, in fact, right? There's an illusion of success, an illusion
right.
of fulfillment. And I think every single time, this is just my personal feeling, if you can't get it in a nice way, you're going to seek the illusion because you still need it and you still have a hunger for it. And we can get into a whole political discussion about why people, need certain things and have fundamental rights and all of that. But those two
Well,
things are
and
linked in
also,
that way.
yeah, and that I mean, you could also argue that part of the reason that people turn to those things is to as distractions to help them forget that they're not like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not even maybe that like alcohol is the answer. It's that alcohol makes me forget that I need the answer.
Yep.
Like alcohol makes me feel like I don't care
Mm-hmm.
if I don't have purpose. I don't care if I
Oh
don't
yeah,
have love. I don't care if I, don't feel whatever.
definitely.
So it's all just a matter of like unraveling, like that statement's like, what is the pain saying?
Definitely.
What is it? Because your entire makeup, I think, is geared towards saving you
Mm-hmm.
and is geared toward like communicating good to you. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, you know there's so much about anxiety where it's like, your thoughts are out to get you and they're attacking you. And I don't know, I feel like the self-preservation survival mode is a lot stronger than any other mode.
Definitely. I think in that headspace,
Yeah.
the addiction headspace, that is self-preservation. You are in survival mode in that way. I
Yes.
definitely, just
Yes.
speaking from
I
my own
agree.
experience, definitely used it for a long time to tap out, just to tap out. You're like, no, I don't want
Yep.
to do this anymore. I'm just gonna go somewhere else. But
Go
you do
over
that in
here.
like a mental way.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
definitely.
And it's hard to do that on your own.
Hmm.
It's hard to shut down your conscience on your own.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, Sandy, this has been wonderful.
Definitely.
I'm so glad that we picked these. I feel like they fit very well together. I would recommend these to anybody to do a double feature. I watched them within the same 24 hours, and
Same.
it's just so good. And if you want to think about these things, I think we ended up talking a lot about things that aren't just female related. They're
Hmm.
like period, like across the board universal stuff.
I
But
think so.
um, yeah, but these movies are at least like maybe not feminist so much as speaking through like a feminine, it's a feminine lens
Hmm.
maybe, and it's like those voices, but it still I think
Hmm. You
could
said something
speak
in
to
your
anyone.
review, that what's feminist here is universal or something
Yeah,
along those lines. I thought
right.
that was great. That
Yeah,
it may be a feminine lens, but we're talking about issues that concern all of us,
all of
which
us.
I think is the best of film a lot of the time. Dealing with something that
Yeah.
we all have felt, something that we all can relate to in the human experience. So,
And that you don't have to be a certain person to get it. Like that's
yeah,
where it just
yeah.
transcends, and these stories are like human
Hmm.
stories, not in one particular. So we recommend these movies. It's been a pleasure, Sandy, and we'll see you at the movies.